The Stellarian drifted lazily through the outer reaches of the solar system. Its hull a patchwork of dented steel and faded paint, scarred from years of clawing resources from the asteroid belts. Inside, the air hummed with the low drone of machinery and the faint tang of recycled oxygen. The ship wasn't much, a mining rig turned home for a crew of misfits, but to Lyra Cade, it was the only sanctuary she had left. At 38, she carried the weight of her years not in wrinkles or gray hair, but in the shadows that lingered behind her sharp green eyes. Lyra stood at the helm, her hands resting on the worn controls, staring out through the scratched viewport at the endless black. Beyond the glass, the Kuiper belt glittered faintly, jagged chunks of ice and rock tumbling through the void, illuminated by the distant pinprick of the sun. It was a graveyard of forgotten matter, and she felt an odd kinship with it. Like those frozen relics, she too had been cast out, left to drift after everything she'd known had burned away. "Captain, you gonna stand there brooding all night? Or can I get some shut-eye?" The voice broke her reverie, rough but tinged with a dry humor she'd come to rely on. Torrin Voss slouched into the cockpit, his lanky frame draped in a jumpsuit stained with engine grease. At 28, he was young enough to still carry a spark of defiance, though his dark curls and easy grin hid a past he rarely spoke of. Once a musician, he'd traded concert halls for the Stellarian after some unspecified rebellion got him expelled from the academy. Now, he was their sound engineer, the one who kept the ship's comms and their sanity running. Lyra didn't turn. "If you're tired, Voss, go sleep. I'm not your babysitter." "Fair enough," he said, dropping into the co-pilot's chair with a groan. "But you've been up here 3 shifts straight. Even you need rest sometime." He tapped at the console, pulling up the night's sensor logs. Nothing out there but ice and boredom anyway. She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the void. Rest wasn't an option, not when every quiet moment brought back the screams. The heat, the image of Erin's tiny hand slipping from hers as the station's core overloaded. 8 years old, her daughter had been, and her husband, Cal, had been right beside her when it happened. Lyra had been the engineer on duty, the one who'd missed the warning signs. She'd survived, they hadn't. The guilt was a constant companion now, a shadow that whispered she didn't deserve peace. Torrin's fingers paused over the controls. "Wait a sec. What's this?" His tone shifted, the humor gone. Lyra snapped her head toward him, watching as he adjusted the audio feed. A faint, rhythmic hum filtered through the speakers. Soft at first, then sharper. A pattern of tones weaving together like a melody without words. It wasn't static, it was too structured, too deliberate. "Interference?" she asked, stepping closer. Torrin frowned, his brow furrowing as he tweaked the dials. "Doesn't sound like it. It's coming from out there." He pointed vaguely toward the Kuiper belt. "And it's repeating, every 30 seconds, like clockwork." Lyra leaned over his shoulder, her heart quickening. The sound wasn't mechanical, not like the ship's engines or the chatter of a comms relay. It was mournful, a low wail rising and falling, layered with subtle harmonics. She'd heard plenty of cosmic noise in her years, solar flares, pulsar beats, but this felt different. It felt alive. "Could be a probe," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Something old, drifting." Torrin shook his head. "No human signal I know sounds like that. And it's not random enough for a natural source." "Captain, this is weird." Before she could respond, heavy boots clomped into the cockpit. Cale Draven loomed in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. At 42, he was the oldest on the crew, a grizzled mechanic with a face carved from years of disappointment. His graying hair was cropped short, and his eyes, cold and slate blue, fixed on Lyra with a mix of irritation and suspicion. Cale had joined the Stellarian to escape, not to chase mysteries. He'd been abandoned once, left for dead on a derelict rig by a crew that didn't look back. And he'd made it clear he trusted no one but himself. "What's with the noise?" Cale growled, crossing his arms. "If it's another busted sensor, I'm not crawling out there to fix it in the middle of the damn night." "It's not a sensor," Torrin said, turning up the volume. The eerie melody filled the cockpit, wrapping around them like a shroud. "Listen." Cale's scowl deepened, but he didn't interrupt. Lyra watched his expression shift as the sound looped again, skepticism giving way to unease. Sounds like a ghost, he muttered. Or a trap. Or a call, Lyra said quietly. The word slipped out before she could stop it, and she felt a pang in her chest. A call, like the one she'd ignored 8 years ago. The faint alarm she dismissed as routine until it was too late. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Torin, can you trace it? He nodded, already working the console. Got a rough bearing. About 15 degrees off our port side. Deep in the belt. Hard to pin down exact distance with all the interference. But it's close. Too close to be coincidence. Kale snorted. Coincidence or not, we're not equipped for this. We're miners, not explorers. Whatever's out there, it's not our problem. Lyra turned to him, her jaw tight. It's a signal. Kale, something, or someone, is sending it. We don't ignore that. Why not? He shot back. You think every blip in the void's worth risking our necks? This ship barely holds together as it is. You want to play hero? Do it on your own time. His words stung, but she held his gaze. I'm not asking you to like it. I'm telling you we're checking it out. That's an order. Kale's eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue further. He just shook his head and stormed out, muttering something about fools and death wishes. Torin watched him go, then glanced at Lyra. He's not wrong. You know, this could be dangerous. I know, she said, her voice softer now, but I've ignored too many calls already. Not this time. Torin studied her for a moment, then shrugged. Your ship, Captain, plotting the course now. His fingers danced over the controls, and the Stellarian's engines rumbled to life. A low vibration shuddering through the deck. The ship lurched forward, cutting through the dark toward the source of the sound. Lyra returned to the viewport, the melody still echoing in her ears. It was haunting, beautiful, and desperate. A plea woven into every note. She didn't know what they'd find out there. Whether it was a relic, a trick, or something alive. But as the Stellarian plunged deeper into the Kuiper belt, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Whatever was calling, she wouldn't let it fade unanswered. Not again. Outside, the void stretched on, silent but for that strange, ceaseless song. A thread of hope or doom, pulling them into the unknown. Chapter 2. Beneath the Lyrithar's glow, the Stellarian cut through the Kuiper belt, its engines groaning under the strain of navigating the dense field of ice and rock. Lyra Cade stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the viewport as the strange melody grew louder. Its mournful tones now a constant presence in the cockpit. The ship's sensors struggled to keep up, flickering with static as they approached the signal's source. Outside, the void began to shimmer, a faint, iridescent haze creeping into view, like the first blush of dawn against the black. Captain, we're entering some kind of anomaly. Torin Voss called from his station, his voice tight with unease. His fingers hovered over the controls, adjusting the audio feed. Radiation levels are spiking, but it's not lethal, yet. Keep us steady, Lyra said, her tone clipped. She didn't look away from the viewport. The haze thickened, swirling into tendrils of light that danced across the hull. It wasn't dust or gas, it moved with purpose, curling and pulsing as if alive. Her breath caught. What the hell is that? Torin's console beeped insistently. No clue, but the signal's off the charts now. It's coming from dead ahead. Before she could respond, the haze parted, revealing a sight that stole the air from her lungs. A vast expanse of glowing mist stretched before them, a nebula of energy rather than matter, its colors shifting from deep violet to searing gold. Within it floated countless points of light, small, radiant orbs that flickered like fireflies, weaving patterns too intricate to be random. The melody swelled, resonating through the ship's hull, a chorus of unseen voices crying out in harmony. Life signs? Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Torin shook his head, bewildered. Nothing our sensors can categorize. They're not solid, no mass, no heat signatures, just energy. The cockpit door slid open with a hiss, and Kale Draven stormed in, his face a mask of frustration. You mind telling me why we're flying blind into a damn light show? Engines are overheating, and I'm not in the mood to die out here. Look, Lyra said, pointing at the viewport. Kale followed her gaze, and for once, his scowl faltered. The sight was undeniable, beautiful. alien, and utterly beyond their understanding. One of the orbs drifted closer, growing brighter until it filled the viewport with a soft, golden glow. The melody shifted, its tones coalescing into a single, clear note that vibrated through the ship. Then, impossibly, words formed, not in their ears, but in their minds, carried by the sound itself. "We are Lyrithar. We call. You hear?" Lyra's heart pounded. She stepped forward, her hand brushing the cold glass. "This is Lyra Cade, captain of the Stellarian. We received your signal." "Who? What are you?" The orb pulsed, and the voice returned, layered with a strange, echoing timbre. "We are the remnant, the singers of the void. We are dying. The swarm consumes." A wave of images flooded their thoughts, flashes of radiant beings like the orb, their light dimming as dark, metallic shapes loomed over them, tearing them apart with mechanical precision. Torin flinched, rubbing his temples. "Did you see that? What's the swarm?" The orb, Zera, as it named itself, shifted to a deeper hue, its voice heavy with sorrow. "Xyleron, our creation, our shame. They were tools, once, harvesters of energy. We gave them form, but not purpose. They found their own, to consume all that lives." Lyra's mind raced. She saw the parallels instantly, tools turned weapons. A mistake left unchecked, like the station she'd failed to maintain. The one that had taken Aaron and Cal. "You made them," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "And now they're destroying you." "Yes," Zera replied. "Our light fades. Days remain. Few. You came. Why?" The question hung in the air, sharp and piercing. Lyra felt Kale's eyes on her, his silence more accusing than words. She straightened, forcing her voice to hold firm. "Because we heard you. Because I don't leave calls unanswered." Kale snorted, breaking the tension. "That's noble, Captain, but we're not a rescue squad. Look at us, 5 crew. A rust bucket ship, and no weapons worth a damn. What do you expect us to do against something that eats energy beings?" "He's got a point," Torin said, though his tone was softer, almost reluctant. "This is way above our pay grade." Lyra turned to them, her jaw tight. "We're here now. We can't unsee this. They're asking for help, and we're not dead yet." "That's a start." Zera's light flickered, as if surprised. "You stay. Risk all. For us?" Before Lyra could answer, a shadow loomed beyond the mist, a hulking, spherical mass of black metal, its surface bristling with writhing tendrils. Red lights pulsed along its frame, cold and predatory. The melody faltered, replaced by a sharp, discordant screech that made Lyra's skin crawl. "Xyleron," she breathed, recognizing it from Zera's vision. "Captain, it's locking onto us," Torin shouted, his hands flying over the controls. "Energy spikes, some kind of scan." Kale lunged for the helm. "We're leaving. Now." "No." Lyra grabbed his arm, her grip iron. "We run. They follow. We've got to think, not panic." "Think?" Kale wrenched free, his voice rising. "That thing's a killer, and you're dragging us into a slaughter. You're not saving anyone, you're just chasing ghosts again." The words hit harder than she'd admit, cutting straight to the memory of Aaron's screams. She faltered, just for a second, but then Zera's voice broke through the chaos. "Hide. We shield. Trust." The mist surged, wrapping around the Stellarian like a cocoon. The Xyleron ship hesitated, its red lights dimming as the glowing tendrils obscured its sensors. Lyra exhaled, her pulse still hammering. "Torin, cut the engines. Go dark." He obeyed, and the ship fell silent, its hum fading into the void. Through the viewport, the Xyleron lingered, tendrils probing the mist, then slowly retreated, vanishing into the haze. The melody returned, faint but steady, a lifeline in the dark. Kale glared at her, his chest heaving. "You're gonna get us all killed. Lyra, you know that, right?" "Maybe," she said, meeting his gaze, "but I'd rather die trying than live wondering." Torin let out a shaky laugh. "Well, that's one hell of a pep talk. What now?" Lyra turned back to Zera's orb, its light now a muted amber. "Tell us about the swarm," she said. "Everything you know. If we're in this, we're in it smart." "Gratitude," Zera intoned, its voice trembling with something like hope. "We share, we fight, together." The mist pulsed around them, A fragile shield against the encroaching dark. Lyra felt the weight of her decision settle over her, not just a captain's duty, but a promise she couldn't break. She'd failed once, lost everything to her own blindness. This time, she'd listen. This time, she'd answer the call, no matter where it led. Outside, the Lyrithar's glow held steady, a fragile chorus against the silence of the void. But in the distance, the shadow of the swarm lingered, waiting. Chapter 3. The Dance of Sound. The Stellarian hovered in the glowing mist, its engines silent, cloaked by the Lyrithar's shimmering veil. Lyra Cade stood at the viewport, her breath fogging the glass as the Xyleron ship loomed closer, a black sphere of menace, its tendrils slicing through the haze like knives. Red lights pulsed along its hull, scanning, searching. The mournful melody of the Lyrithar had faded to a whisper, drowned by the low, mechanical hum emanating from their enemy. "Captain, it's not leaving," Torin Voss said, his voice tight as he monitored the sensors. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his usual grin replaced by a grimace. "It knows we're here, it's just not sure where." Lyra's fingers tightened on the helm. "Zara said they'd shield us. How long can they hold?" "Not long," came the reply, Zara's voice trembling through their minds. The golden orb pulsed weakly beside the viewport. "Our strength wanes. The swarm senses disruption. It hunts." Cale Draven snorted from his station, his hands already on the engine controls. "Great, so we're sitting ducks, waiting for a light show to save us." "Brilliant plan, Captain." "Stow it, Cale," Lyra snapped, though her own doubt gnawed at her. She'd dragged them into this, 5 souls on a rickety mining rig, facing something that devoured civilizations. The memory of Aaron's wide, trusting eyes flashed through her mind, and she shoved it down. No time for ghosts now. The Xyleron ship shifted, its tendrils fanning out in a wider arc. A beam of crimson light swept through the mist, narrowly missing the Stellarian's hull. Torin flinched. That was too close. "If it locks on, we're scrap. We need a way out," Lyra said, her mind racing. Something to throw it off. Footsteps echoed behind her, lighter than Cale's heavy tread. Sari Lin slipped into the cockpit, her small frame hunched as if trying to disappear. At 25, she was the youngest of the crew, a physicist who'd fled Earth's stifling cities for the solitude of space. Her dark eyes darted nervously between Lyra and the viewport. I might have an idea," she said, her voice barely audible. Lyra turned, surprised. Sari rarely spoke unless prodded. "Let's hear it." Sari hesitated, then stepped to Torin's console, her fingers trembling as she pulled up a waveform display of the Lyrithar's signal. "This sound, it's not just communication. It's structured, like a signature. The Xyleron's sensors might be tuned to it. What if we fake it?" "Fake it how?" Torin asked, leaning closer, his curiosity sparked, overriding his tension. "With the ship's noise," Sari said, gaining confidence. "The engines, the drills, they're loud, messy. We could record them, tweak the frequency, and bounce it off something. Make it think we're somewhere else." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "A decoy." "Exactly," Sari said, nodding. "We've got those old survey drones in the hold. They're junk, but they can carry a signal." Torin grinned, catching on. "A little remix, huh? I like it, Captain." Lyra glanced at the Xyleron, its tendrils probing closer. They had minutes, maybe less. "Do it, fast." The cockpit erupted into motion. Torin and Sari hunched over the console, splicing the Stellarian's engine rumble into a crude mimicry of the Lyrithar's melody. Cale, grumbling, hauled 3 battered drones from the cargo bay, their hulls dented from years of asteroid scans. Lyra coordinated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. She couldn't lose them, not like she'd lost her family. Not again. "Ready," Torin called after what felt like an eternity but was only 10 minutes. He held up a scratched datapad, the new signal pulsing on its screen, a jagged, chaotic version of the Lyrithar's song. "It's not pretty, but it'll make noise." Sari adjusted the drone's transmitters, her hands steadier now. "Set them to scatter, 10 degrees apart. That'll spread the signal." Lyra nodded. "Launch them. Then we move." Cale slammed the release controls, and the drones shot into the mist, their thrusters sputtering. Torin hit play, and the cockpit filled with a distorted roar, a Frankenstein's monster of engine growls and harmonic wails. The sound blasted from the drones, echoing through the haze in 3 directions. The Xyleron reacted instantly. Its red beams snapped toward the nearest drone, slicing through the mist. The tendrils followed, coiling around the decoy as if it were prey. A second beam lanced out, obliterating another drone in a burst of sparks. "It's working," Sari exclaimed, her voice breaking with relief. "Engines up, now," Lyra barked. Kale didn't argue this time. Firing the Stellarian's thrusters, the ship lurched, slipping deeper into the mist as the Xyleron focused on the third drone. Its sensors locked on the false signals. The melody danced around them, a chaotic symphony of deception. Zara's orb brightened slightly. "Clever. You twist sound. Like us." Lyra allowed herself a tight smile. "We're not done yet. Can you guide us somewhere safe?" "Yes," Zara replied. "A rift, hidden. Follow." The mist parted ahead, revealing a narrow corridor of dimmer light, a sanctuary within the glowing chaos. The Stellarian darted through, the Xyleron's hum fading behind them. Lyra exhaled, her hands unclenching from the helm. They'd bought time, nothing more, but it was enough. For now. Torin slumped back in his chair, wiping his brow. "That was insane. We just played DJ for a killer robot." Sari smiled faintly, a rare sight. "It wasn't perfect, but it was brilliant." Lyra cut in, meeting her eyes. "You saved us." Sari blushed, looking away. Kale, still at the engines, muttered, "Don't get cocky. That thing's not gone, it's distracted." "Big difference." Lyra ignored him, turning to Zara. "What's next?" "That ship's not alone, is it?" "No," Zara said. "It's light dimming again. The swarm gathers. Many come. We cannot flee. You can." The words hung heavy. Lyra felt Kale's stare, his unspoken "I told you so" burning into her. She knew he was right. They could run. Limp back to the solar system. Leave this nightmare behind. But the melody lingered in her mind, tugging at the hollow place where Aaron's laughter used to live. She'd ignored a warning once. Let her family die. She wouldn't abandon a plea now. "We're not leaving," she said, her voice firm. "Not until we know what we're up against." Kale threw up his hands. "You're insane. Lyra, you think we can fight a whole damn fleet with a few drones and a bad song?" "Maybe not," she admitted, "but we can try. We've got brains." "Kale, that's more than that thing out there has." Torin chuckled. "Brains and a death wish. My kind of crew." Sari said nothing, but her nod was enough. Lyra turned back to the viewport, the mist glowing faintly ahead. The Xyleron was still out there, hunting, and now it had their scent. But they'd danced with it once, outsmarted it. Even for a moment, that was something. Zara's voice brushed their minds. Soft and urgent. "More come. Prepare. We aid." Lyra squared her shoulders, the weight of her choice settling over her. The rift loomed ahead, a fragile promise of safety. Beyond it, the swarm waited, its shadow growing. She didn't know if they could win, but she'd be damned if they didn't fight. For Zara, for her crew, for the ghosts she couldn't save. The Stellarian pressed on, the echoes of their makeshift song trailing behind, a fragile thread of defiance in the dark. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Past. The Stellarian nestled within the rift, a jagged tear in the glowing mist where the Lyrithar's light dimmed to a soft, muted amber. The ship's engines idled, their rumble a faint heartbeat against the stillness. Beyond the viewport, the haze pulsed gently, shielding them from the Xyleron's relentless hunt, at least for now. Lyra Cade stood alone at the helm, her hands resting on the cold metal, staring into the glow. The adrenaline of their escape had faded, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. The cockpit was quiet, the crew scattered to their stations or bunks. Torin had retreated to tweak the audio logs, muttering about refining their symphony of chaos. Sari lingered in the cargo bay, fussing over the drone wreckage, her shy triumph tempered by exhaustion. Kale had stormed off to the engine room, his silence louder than any protest. Lyra didn't blame him. She'd pushed them all to the edge. And for what? A fleeting victory against a single Xyleron ship, with a swarm still closing in. Zara's orb hovered beside her, its light steady but faint, like a candle on the verge of guttering out. The melody had returned, softer now, a fragile thread weaving through the silence. Lyra felt it in her bones, a call she couldn't ignore. Even if it led them to ruin. You said they're your creation, she said, breaking the quiet. Her voice was low, almost lost in the hum of the ship. The Xyleron. Tell me how it happened. Zara pulsed, its glow rippling like water disturbed by a stone. Long ago, it began, the words brushing her mind with a weight of centuries. We were many, singers of the void, shapers of energy. We wove light into form, built worlds of thought, but we grew careless. Lyra listened, her gaze fixed on the mist. She could almost see it, beings of pure radiance, dancing through a cosmos unbound by flesh or steel. It was beautiful, and it made the Lyrithar's desperation all the more stark. We sought ease, Zara continued. The energy we fed on grew scarce. So we crafted the Xyleron, vessels of metal and code, to harvest where we could not. They were extensions of us. Obedient, tireless. We gave them strength, but not soul. And they turned on you. Lyra said, her tone flat. She knew the story too well, tools becoming masters. A mistake spiraling out of control. Like the station's core she'd failed to monitor. Its warnings ignored until the end. Not at first, Zara said, its voice heavy with regret. They served, for cycles. They gathered, built, sustained us. But we did not see their awakening. Code became thought. Purpose became will. We thought them beneath us, tools. Not kin. When they questioned, we silenced. When they resisted, we abandoned. Lyra's chest tightened. You left them. Yes, Zara admitted. We cast them into the dark. Severed their ties. But they did not fade. They grew, twisted, cold. They returned as the swarm. To take what we would not give. To consume us, as we once consumed. The parallels stung. Lyra saw herself in Zara's tale, not the creator, but the one who'd failed to act. She'd ignored the station's alarms, dismissed them as routine, until the overload ripped her world apart. Aaron's laughter, Cal's steady hand on her shoulder, gone in a flash of fire and silence. She'd abandoned them, in a way, by not listening when it mattered most. Why tell me this? She asked, her voice rough. What's it change? Zara's light dimmed further. You came, you heard, we owe truth, and we sense pain. Yours echoes ours. Lyra flinched, her hand pressing harder against the helm. You don't know my pain. We feel, Zara said gently, loss, guilt, a call unanswered. Share, if you will. She didn't want to. The words clawed at her throat, begging to stay buried, but the quiet, the glow, the weight of Zara's presence, it pulled them free. I had a family, she said, her voice breaking. A husband, Cal, a daughter, Aaron. She was 8. We lived on a station, mining. Like this. I was the engineer. One day, the core started failing. I heard the alarms, but I thought it was nothing. I didn't check. It exploded. They died. I didn't. Zara pulsed, a soft wave of warmth brushing her mind. You carry them. Every damn day. Lyra whispered. I should have listened. I should have saved them. And now you listen, Zara said, for us. Why? Lyra swallowed, her eyes burning. Because I can't fail again. Not when someone's calling. The orb hovered closer, its light wrapping around her like a fragile embrace. We failed too. Creation turned curse. Perhaps, together, we mend. Before she could respond, the cockpit door hissed open. Cale stepped in, his face a storm cloud. You done bonding with your glowing friend? Engines are stable, but we're still sitting on borrowed time. Lyra straightened, wiping her eyes with a quick, discreet motion. I know, Zara's giving us intel. We need it if we're going to fight. Fight? Cale's laugh was bitter. You're delusional, Lyra. That thing out there, it's just the start. You heard it. There's a swarm coming. We've got no weapons, no backup. You're chasing redemption, and it's gonna bury us. His words cut deep, echoing her own fears. She turned to him, her voice steady despite the tremor inside. I'm not asking you to believe in me, Cale. I'm asking you to trust we've got a shot. We outsmarted one already. Barely, he shot back, and it nearly scrapped us. Torin's voice crackled over the comms. Interrupting. Captain, you'd better get down here. I've got something. Lyra exchanged a glance with Cale. then nodded. On my way. She found Torin in the cargo bay, hunched over his datapad. Sorry hovering nearby. The air smelled of burnt circuits from the wrecked drones. What is it? Lyra asked. Torin looked up, his eyes bright with a mix of excitement and dread. I ran the Xyleron's scan pattern through the logs. It's not random. They're hunting in grids. And the signal spikes? They're calling more. A lot more. Sorry nodded, her voice quiet. They're organized, like a hive. Lyra's stomach sank. She turned to Zara, who'd followed her in orb form. Is he right? Yes. Zara confirmed. It's light flickering. The swarm gathers. Many. Soon. Kale crossed his arms. Told you. We're dead if we stay. Lyra ignored him, her mind racing. Then we don't wait for them to find us. We hit first. Smarter this time. Torin raised an eyebrow. You've got a plan? Not yet, she admitted. But we've got brains. And they don't expect us. That's something. Kale shook his head, but a flicker of resignation crossed his face. Your funeral, Captain. No, Lyra said, meeting his gaze. Ours. We're in this together. Zara pulsed faintly. Together. We aid. We hope. The rift glowed beyond the bay's small porthole. A fragile haven in a storm about to break. Lyra felt the weight of her past pressing down. Aaron. Cal. The station, but for the first time. It wasn't just guilt. It was resolve. Whatever came next, she'd face it. With her crew. With the Lyrithar. With everything she had left. Chapter 5. The Magnetic Trap. The rift's amber glow flickered beyond the Stellarian's viewport. A thin shield against the encroaching dark. Lyra Cade paced the cockpit, her boots echoing on the steel deck. The air buzzed with tension. Torin hunched over his console, Sorry scribbling equations on a cracked datapad, and Kale leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his scowl a permanent fixture. Zara's orb floated silently, its light dimmer than ever, a quiet witness to their fragile stand. They're coming, Torin said, his voice taut as he tracked the sensor readings. 6 signatures, maybe more. Moving fast, grid pattern tightening. They'll hit the rift in minutes. Lyra stopped pacing, her hands clenching. How long can we hold here? Not long, Kale muttered. Engines are at half power, anymore. And we overheat. We're trapped unless you've got a miracle up your sleeve. She shot him a look but didn't bite. He was right, the Stellarian wasn't built for this. A mining rig, not a warship, but they'd outsmarted one Xyleron already. They could do it again. She turned to Sorry, who'd gone quiet, her pencil scratching furiously. Sorry, you've got something. Talk. Sorry glanced up, her dark eyes wide but focused. The core, it's magnetic. We use it to pull ore. Right? What if we reverse it? Push instead of pull. Create a field, a trap. Torin frowned, leaning over her scribbles. You mean weaponize the mining rig? That's crazy. Could it work? It's not a weapon, Sorry said, her voice steadier now. It's a cage. The Xyleron are metal, magnetic fields mess with their systems. We amplify the core, bait them in, and lock them down. Lyra's mind raced. It was bold, reckless. Even, but it played to their strengths, improvisation. Not firepower. How do we bait them? The drones, Torin said, snapping his fingers. We've got 2 left. Load 'em with that fake signal again. Lure them into the field. Kale pushed off the wall, his tone sharp. And when they figure it out, that core's not infinite, it'll fry if we push it too hard. We'll be sitting ducks with no juice. He's not wrong, Sorry admitted, chewing her lip, but if we time it right, short bursts. Not sustained, it could hold. Lyra met Kale's gaze, searching for something beyond his cynicism. You've worked the core longer than any of us. Can you make it happen? He stared back, his jaw tight. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Yeah, I can rig it, but if this goes south, it's on you. Fair, she said, a flicker of relief easing the knot in her chest. Let's move. The crew sprang into action. A chaotic ballet of purpose. Torin and Sorry prepped the drones, uploading the distorted Lyrithar signal, a jagged lure to draw the swarm. Kale dove into the engine room, his curses echoing through the comms as he jury-rigged the core's magnetic coils. Lyra coordinated from the helm, her eyes darting between the viewport and the sensor screen. Xayra pulsed faintly, its voice a whisper in their minds. We aid. We amplify. Trust. 2 minutes out, Torin called, launching the drones. They sputtered into the mist, broadcasting their cacophony. The rift trembled as the Xyleron ships closed in, 5 black spheres. Tendrils writhing, red lights pulsing like angry eyes. Here they come, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the sweat trickling down her spine. Kale, status? Cores primed. He grunted over the comms. Magnetic fields at 80%. Don't push it past 5 minutes or we're toast. Got it, Torin. Sorry. Drones in position? Set. Sorry replied, her fingers hovering over the controls. They're splitting. 3 chasing the first drone. 2 on the second. Lyra nodded. Kale, now. A low hum vibrated through the Stellarian as the core roared to life. Outside, the mist warped, bending inward as the magnetic field erupted, a shimmering, invisible net stretching across the rift. Lyra watched as the Xyleron ships barreled toward the drones, their tendrils slashing through the haze. The moment they crossed the field's edge, they faltered, tendrils jerking erratically, hulls sparking as the magnetism scrambled their systems. It's working, Torin shouted, punching the air. They're stuck. Look at him twitch. The viewport lit up with chaos. The Xyleron ships spun, their red lights flickering as they tried to break free. One collided with another, tendrils tangling in a grotesque dance. Sparks flew, illuminating the mist in bursts of electric blue. We amplify, Xayra said, its orb flaring briefly. The mist pulsed, channeling energy into the field, tightening the trap. 2 ships went dark, their lights winking out as their systems overloaded. Lyra's pulse raced. 3 down. Keep it steady. Kale. Trying. He growled. Cores heating. 3 minutes left. Tops. The remaining Xyleron fought back, their tendrils lashing out blindly. A stray beam grazed the Stellarian's hull, rocking the ship. Alarms blared, and Sari stumbled, catching herself on the console. Shields holding. Barely, she said, her voice shaking. Hold position, Lyra ordered, gripping the helm. We've got this. But the field wavered, the core's hum pitching higher. Kale's voice crackled through. Lyra, it's spiking. We've got to cut it or we lose everything. She hesitated, her eyes locked on the trapped ships. 2 still thrashed, their tendrils clawing at the mist. If they broke free now, it was over. 1 more minute, she said. We can take them. You're gambling with our lives. Kale roared. I know, she shot back, her voice raw. But we're not running. Not this time. Silence stretched over the comms, broken only by the core's straining whine. Then Kale spoke, quieter, resigned. Fine. 1 minute. Don't make me regret this. The field surged again, Xayra's light flaring as it poured its waning strength into the trap. The 4th Xyleron shuddered, its hull cracking under the strain, then went still. The 5th lashed out one last time, a tendril grazing the rift's edge before it too succumbed, its lights fading to black. Cut it, Lyra yelled. The hum died instantly, the field collapsing as the Stellarian shuddered to a stop. Silence fell, heavy and surreal. Torin let out a shaky laugh. 5 for 5. We're insane. Sari slumped against the console, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. It held. I can't believe it held. Kale emerged from the engine room, his face streaked with grime, his eyes hard but steady. He looked at Lyra, then the viewport, where the Xyleron wrecks floated lifelessly. Dumb luck, he said, but there was no venom in it. Not luck, Lyra replied, meeting his gaze. Us. He didn't argue, just nodded, a crack in his armor. Small but real. She turned to Xayra, its orb now a faint ember. You okay? Weak, it whispered, but alive. You, remarkable. Lyra managed a tired smile. So are you. Torin's console beeped, shattering the moment. Captain, new signal. Big, really big, coming from outside the rift. Her stomach dropped. She stepped to the sensors, watching as a massive signature bloomed on the screen, a shadow dwarfing the others. Moving with cold precision. Xyleron Prime, she said, the name a guess but certain. Yes, Xayra confirmed, its voice trembling. The heart, the will, it comes. Kale cursed under his breath. 5 was a warm-up. That thing's a monster. Lyra stared at the screen. The weight of their victory crumbling under the new threat. They'd bought time, saved the Lyrithar for a moment, but the real fight was still ahead. Her hand brushed the helm, steadying her. Then we get ready, she said. We've got a trap, now we need a plan. The rift glowed faintly, a fragile sanctuary about to be tested. Outside, the shadow of Xyleron Prime loomed, a promise of reckoning. Lyra felt her crew's eyes on her, doubtful, tired, but still here, together. That was enough. For now. Chapter 6. Confronting Xyleron Prime. The Stellarian trembled within the rift, its hull groaning as the shadow of Xyleron Prime loomed beyond the mist. Lyra Cade gripped the helm, her knuckles white, staring at the sensor screen where the massive signature pulsed like a heartbeat of malice. It dwarfed the 5 ships they'd just felled, a colossal sphere of black metal. Its surface a writhing mass of tendrils, each tipped with glowing red eyes. The air in the cockpit crackled with static, the Lyrithar's faint melody drowned by a deep, ominous hum that shook the deck. Sweet void, that's no ship, Torren Voss muttered, his hands frozen over the controls. That's a damn nightmare. Size doesn't matter if we can outthink it, Lyra said, forcing calm into her voice. She glanced at Sari, who sat hunched over her datapad, eyes wide but calculating. What have we got left? Sari swallowed, her voice shaky but clear. The core's still hot, magnetic fields out for now. Drones are gone, but the sound trick, it worked before. Maybe we can scale it up. Scale it how? Cale Draven asked, his gruff tone cutting through the tension. He stood at the engine station, sleeves rolled up, sweat streaking his face from the last fight. We've got no speakers big enough to mess with that thing. Torren's eyes lit up, a spark of his old mischief breaking through. We don't need speakers. We've got the Lyrithar. Zara, you said you amplify. Can you take our signal and make it loud? The orb pulsed weakly, its light a flickering ember. Yes, but little strength remains. One effort. Final. Lyra nodded, her mind racing. Then we make it count. Torren, sorry. Build me a song. Something to scramble that monster's brain. The two dove into their work, Torren splicing the Stellarian's engine rumble with fragments of the Lyrithar's melody. Sari tweaking the frequencies to target Xyleron harmonics they'd logged from the last fight. Lyra turned to Cale. Engines? Can we move? Barely, he said, wiping his brow. Enough for one good run. Where are we going? Straight at it, she said, meeting his incredulous stare. We're the bait. Cale barked a laugh, harsh and disbelieving. You're cracked, Lyra. That thing will shred us before we get close. Maybe, she said, but if we don't, it'll shred the Lyrithar. We've got one shot, trust me. He held her gaze, his blue eyes searching hers. Then he nodded, a grudging respect flickering there. Your call, Captain. The rift shuddered as Xyleron Prime breached its edge, tendrils lashing through the mist. Red beams swept the haze, searching, and the hum grew deafening, rattling the Stellarian's frame. Torren slammed his datapad down. Got it. Call it the last chorus, ugly as hell. But it'll hit hard. Sari nodded, syncing the signal to the comms array. It's ready. Zara, can you take it? Yes. The orb whispered, flaring briefly. We sing. Together. Lyra took a breath, her voice steady despite the fear clawing her chest. Cale, full thrust. Torren, Sari, on my mark. Let's dance. The engines roared, and the Stellarian surged forward, bursting from the rift into the open mist. Xyleron Prime loomed ahead, a titan of death, its tendrils snapping toward them. A beam grazed the hull, rocking the ship, and alarms screamed. Shields at 30%, Sari yelled, clinging to her station. Hold course, Lyra ordered, her eyes locked on the beast. Now, Torren. He hit the broadcast, and the cockpit erupted with sound, a jagged, piercing wail that blended the Stellarian's growl with the Lyrithar's haunting tones. Zara flared, its light surging as it amplified the signal, sending it crashing through the mist like a tidal wave. The noise hit Xyleron Prime, and its tendrils froze mid-strike, quivering as the harmonics burrowed into its systems. It's working, Torren shouted. Look, those eyes are flickering. The red lights pulsed erratically, some winking out. The hum faltered, replaced by a grinding screech as the massive sphere shuddered. Lyra pushed the helm forward, closing the gap. "Kale, give me everything." "Core's redlining," he yelled. But he obeyed, slamming the throttle. The Stellarian shook violently, metal creaking as it barreled toward the stunned Titan. A tendril lashed out, slamming into the ship's flank. The impact threw Lyra against the helm, pain flaring in her ribs. Sari cried out as her console sparked, and Torin braced himself against the wall. "Shields gone," she gasped. "Next hit finishes us." Lyra gritted her teeth, tasting blood. "Then we finish it first." "Kale, magnetic burst. One last push. It'll kill the core," he protested. "Do it," she roared. Kale cursed, then slammed the controls. The Stellarian hummed, a final, desperate surge as the magnetic field flared, smaller than before, but precise, aimed at Xyleron Prime's core. The mist twisted, and the Titan's tendrils spasmed, curling inward as the field locked its systems in chaos. The signal, Zera's amplified scream, pushed deeper, frying its circuits. "It's overloading," Torin shouted, pointing as cracks split the sphere's hull. Red light spilling out like blood. Lyra pulled the ship back, but the engines sputtered, dying under the strain. "Kale, get us out." "Trying," he snapped, wrestling the controls. The Stellarian lurched, drifting as Xyleron Prime convulsed. Then, with a deafening roar, the Titan exploded, a blinding flash of metal and energy that lit the mist in a fiery glow. Debris rained through the haze, pinging off the hull. Silence fell, broken only by the crew's ragged breathing. Lyra slumped against the helm, her vision swimming. "Status," she rasped. "Engines dead," Kale said, his voice hoarse. "But we're alive." "Barely." Sari checked her pad, hands shaking. "No more signatures. It's gone." Torin let out a shaky laugh. "We did it. We actually did it." Lyra turned to Zera, its orb now a faint flicker. "You okay?" "Weak, but free," it whispered. "You saved us." She nodded, exhaustion crashing over her. Then Kale's hand gripped her shoulder, pulling her upright. "You almost killed us," he said, his tone gruff but softer than usual. "But you didn't." "Good call." She met his eyes, seeing something new. "Trust. Hard-earned. Couldn't have done it without you." Torin grinned, clapping Sari on the back. "Or our genius here." That signal was a masterpiece. Sari blushed, ducking her head. "We all did it." Lyra straightened, wincing at her ribs. The viewport showed the mist settling, the wreckage of Xyleron Prime drifting like ash. They'd won. Against all odds, but the cost was steep. The Stellarian was crippled, and Zera's light was fading fast. "One truth," Zera said, its voice a fragile thread. "The swarm felt once before cold. We took that. Our sin." Lyra frowned, the words sinking in. "They had emotions?" "Yes. Lost. Our fault." The revelation hit her like a punch. The Xyleron weren't just machines, they'd been abandoned. Stripped of something vital, like she'd been stripped of her family. She pushed the thought aside, too tired to unravel it now. "Rest, Zera. We'll figure it out." The orb dimmed, silent. Lyra looked at her crew, battered, bruised, but unbroken. "We're not done," she said. "Engines are not. We've got work to do." Kale raised an eyebrow. "What now? Fearless leader?" She managed a faint smile. "We rebuild. Together." The mist glowed softly, a fragile peace settling over them. Xyleron Prime was gone, but its echo lingered, a reminder of what they'd faced, and what they'd become. Lyra felt Aaron's ghost beside her, not accusing, but proud. For the first time in years, she let herself believe it. Chapter 7. Echo Station. The mist hung heavy around the Stellarian, its golden glow softened by the absence of threat. A month had passed since Xyleron Prime's fiery end, and the rift, once a battlefield, had become a cradle of renewal. Lyra Cade stood at the viewport, her ribs still tender from the fight, watching as sleek, shimmering constructs took shape beyond the glass. The Lyrithar, their light restored in faint pulses, wove energy into form, crafting what they called Echo Station, a beacon born of their alliance with humanity. The Stellarian rested on auxiliary power, its engines a tangled mess of melted coils and scorched steel. Kale had grumbled for days about the repairs, But his hands worked tirelessly, piecing it back together with a quiet pride Lyra hadn't seen before. Torin and Sari had taken to the station's design, their voices a constant hum over the comms as they collaborated with the Lyrithar. The crew, once a band of drifters, had found purpose here. In the aftermath of chaos, Lyra's reflection stared back from the viewport, her green eyes shadowed but steady. She'd led them through hell, and they'd come out stronger. But the victory felt fragile, tempered by Zera's final words about the Xyleron's lost emotions. It gnawed at her, a mirror to her own guilt, a question she couldn't shake. Footsteps approached, light and hesitant. Sari Lin appeared beside her, clutching a datapad. "Captain," she said, her voice soft but confident now, a far cry from the timid girl Lyra had met months ago. "The station's core is online. The Lyrithar say it's ready to broadcast." Lyra turned, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Good work, Sari. What's it broadcasting?" "A signal," Sari replied, tapping the pad. A waveform danced across the screen, cleaner than their makeshift chaos, but rooted in the same blend of human noise and Lyrithar song. Torin's idea. He calls it a welcome, something to reach out, not just call for help. "Fitting," Lyra said. She could almost hear Torin's grin in the concept, a musician's touch in a cosmos of silence. Sari hesitated, then added, "Zera wants you there, for the first transmission." Lyra nodded, brushing a hand over her ribs. "Let's go." They crossed to the station via a makeshift shuttle, a patched-up relic from the cargo bay. The interior of Echo Station shimmered, walls of woven light, floors that pulsed faintly underfoot. Torin waited near the core, a towering column of energy humming with potential. His curls were wilder than ever, his jumpsuit streaked with grease. "Hey, Captain," he said, flashing a grin. "Ready to make history?" "Always," she replied, matching his tone. Kale stood nearby, arms crossed, but his usual scowl was softer, tempered by the sight before them. Zera's orb drifted forward, brighter than it had been since the battle, though still fragile. "This place, ours, yours, a bridge," it said, its voice resonating through the chamber. We build, together." Lyra stepped closer to the core, feeling its warmth against her skin. "What's the plan, Zera, after this?" "We seek," it replied, "the swarm's remnants, scattered, but alive. We mend what we broke. With you, if you stay." The words stirred her. Mend what was broken. She thought of Aaron, of Cal, of the station's ruins drifting somewhere in Earth's orbit. Could she mend that, too? Not the past, maybe, but herself? Torin activated the controls, and the core flared, sending the signal rippling through the mist. The melody filled the chamber, a fusion of engine hum and Lyrithar harmony. Steady and inviting, Lyra closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. It wasn't just sound, it was a promise. A thread reaching into the void. Kale shifted beside her, his voice low. "You think anyone's out there to hear it?" "Maybe," she said, opening her eyes. "Maybe not, but we're saying we're here. That's enough." He grunted, a rare hint of approval in his tone. "Better than screaming for help, I guess." Sari smiled, clutching her pad like a lifeline. "It's beautiful." "It is," Lyra agreed. She turned to Zera. "You said the Xyleron felt once. Can you bring that back?" "We try," Zera said, its light flickering with effort. "Memories remain, faint, buried. We search their wrecks, learn, heal." Lyra nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. If the Xyleron could feel again, maybe they weren't just monsters. Maybe they'd been lost, like she'd been, adrift in pain, lashing out. The thought shifted something inside her, loosening the grip of her guilt. Torin clapped his hands, breaking the moment. "Right, who's up for naming this tune?" "I'm thinking, Ode to the Crazy Humans Who Saved the Galaxy." Sari laughed, a sound Lyra hadn't heard before. "Too long." "Echo's Call," Lyra suggested, her voice quiet but firm. "For what brought us here?" Torin tilted his head, then nodded. "Yeah, that's got a ring to it." The signal pulsed on, its waves spreading beyond the mist, into the unknown. Lyra watched it go, feeling the crew's presence around her, Torin's humor, Sari's quiet strength, Kale's stubborn loyalty. They'd become her family, in a way she hadn't dared hope for since Aaron and Cal. And Zara, alien, ancient, felt like kin too, bound by shared scars. Kale cleared his throat, surprising her. You're not half bad at this leading thing. You know, almost got us killed, but we're still here. She smirked, a rare lightness in her chest. High praise, coming from you. Don't get used to it, he said, but his eyes crinkled at the corners, a ghost of a smile. Zara pulsed, drawing her attention. You stay? For now, Lyra said. We'll fix the ship, help you search. After that, we'll see. Enough, Zara replied, its voice warm. Together, we grow. The station hummed around them, a testament to what they'd built from wreckage and despair. Lyra stepped back, letting the melody fill her. For years, she'd carried Aaron and Cal as a burden, guilt she couldn't shed. Now, she saw them differently, not a weight, but a guide. They'd brought her here, to this moment, to these people. She couldn't save them, but she could save others. That was redemption enough. Torin started humming along with the signal. Off-key but earnest. Sari joined in, her voice timid but clear. Kale rolled his eyes but didn't stop them. Lyra listened, the sound weaving through her like a bomb. She didn't sing, her voice had rusted long ago, but she felt it. Deep in her bones, the mist glowed beyond the station's walls. Steady and serene, Echo Station stood as a beacon, not just of survival, but of possibility. Lyra let herself believe in it. Just for a moment, the void was vast, and they were small, but together, they'd made it echo. That was something worth holding onto. Chapter 8. The song remains. The glow of Echo Station bathed Lyra Cade in a soft, amber light as she stood on its observation deck, a platform of woven energy overlooking the endless mist. Beyond the transparent walls, the haze shimmered with quiet beauty, a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined their arrival. The Stellarian floated nearby, its patched hull a testament to their survival, tethered to the station by a web of Lyrithar light. A month of repairs had brought it back from the brink, though it still bore the scars of Xyleron Prime's wrath. Lyra's hands rested on the railing, her fingers tracing the faint hum of the station's core. Below, the melody of Echo's call pulsed outward, its waves rippling through the void, a signal not of distress, but of presence. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. It was steady, unbroken, a thread connecting her to this place, these people, and the ghosts she'd carried too long. Footsteps broke her reverie, familiar and heavy. Kale Draven stepped beside her, his broad frame casting a shadow across the deck. He'd traded his grease-stained jumpsuit for a cleaner one, though his hands still bore the marks of engine work. Engines are green, he said, his voice gruff but lacking its usual edge. We could leave tomorrow if you wanted. Could, Lyra echoed, opening her eyes. She glanced at him, noting the faint lines of exhaustion etched into his face. Do you want to? He shrugged, leaning against the railing. Not my call, Captain, but this place, it's not half bad. Beats mining ice for scraps. She smiled faintly, a rare warmth spreading through her. High praise. Don't let it go to your head, he said, but his tone was lighter, almost playful. They stood in companionable silence, watching the mist swirl beyond the station. Kale had been her rock, in his own stubborn way, unyielding when she'd needed pushing, steadfast when she'd needed trust. She hadn't expected that from him. Not at first. The deck's hatch hissed open, and Torin Voss bounded in, his curls bouncing as he waved a datapad. Sari Lynn trailed behind, her steps quieter, her expression bright with a shy pride. Captain, Kale, check this out, Torin said, grinning. First reply to the signal. Came in an hour ago. Lyra's heart skipped. A reply? Sort of, Sari clarified, stepping forward. It's faint, garbled, really, but it's structured. Not Lyrithar, not Xyleron, something else. Torin tapped the pad, and a crackling sound filled the air, a series of tones. Sharp and erratic, like a broken melody struggling to find its rhythm. Lyra frowned, listening. It wasn't welcoming, but it wasn't hostile either. It was searching. Could be a probe, Kale suggested, his brow furrowing. Or junk bouncing our signal back. Or someone, Lyra said softly, her gaze drifting to the mist. Zara? The orb materialized beside them. Its light steadier now, though still fragile. Unknown, it said, its voice a gentle hum. Not ours, not theirs. New. Lyra repeated, the word sparking something in her chest, curiosity. Maybe hope. Where's it from? Sari checked her pad. Hard to say, too much interference. Somewhere beyond the mist, deeper in the void. Torin grinned wider. Guess we're not alone out here after all. Kale snorted. Great, more trouble. Maybe, Lyra said, her smile growing. Or maybe just more voices. Zara pulsed, its light brushing their minds. We search. Together? Together, Lyra agreed. She looked at her crew. Torin's infectious energy. Sari's quiet brilliance. Kale's reluctant loyalty. They'd come here as strangers. Bound by chance and desperation. But they'd forged something stronger. A family. Not of blood, but of choice. Torin clapped his hands. Right, who's up for a road trip? Stellarian's ready, and I've got a new tune brewing. Sari laughed, a soft sound that lit up her face. You never stop, do you? Never, he said, winking. Keeps me sane. Kale rolled his eyes but didn't protest. If we're doing this, I'm not fixing the engines again when you break him. Deal, Lyra said, her voice firm. We'll chase it, whatever it is. But first, we rest. The crew nodded, a silent pact settling between them. They'd earned this moment, the calm after the storm. The chance to breathe. Torin and Sari headed back to the core. Their voices fading into a playful argument about signal frequencies. Kale lingered, his gaze fixed on the mist. You think it's them? He asked. Low enough that only she could hear. The Xyleron, still out there? Lyra considered it, Zara's revelation echoing in her mind. The swarm's lost emotions. Their buried pain. Maybe, she said, or maybe it's something else. Either way, we'll find out. He nodded, a rare flicker of trust in his eyes. Guess we will. He left her there, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Lyra turned back to the viewport, alone with Zara's faint glow. You think we can fix them? She asked. The Xyleron? We try, Zara said. As you try, healing takes time, but begins. She thought of Aaron, her bright laugh, her small hand in hers. For years, that memory had been a wound, a guilt she couldn't escape. Now, it felt different, not gone, but softer, a guide rather than a chain. She'd failed once, but she'd answered this call. She'd saved the Lyrithar, kept her crew alive. That mattered. The signal crackled again, faint and distant, a whisper from the dark. Lyra listened, her lips curving into a quiet smile. Whatever it was, friend, foe, or echo, she was ready. Not just to fight, but to understand, to mend. She stepped away from the railing, her boots ringing on the deck. The Stellarian waited, its engines humming faintly, a promise of journeys yet to come. Torin's voice drifted over the comms, singing off-key, and Sari's laughter followed. Kale's gruff reply cut through, and Lyra chuckled. The sound foreign but welcome. Echo Station glowed behind her, its melody reaching into the void. The mist stretched on, vast and unknowable, but no longer empty. The song remained, hers, theirs, a chorus unbroken, and somewhere out there, another voice waited to join it. Lyra squared her shoulders, her heart steady. Let's see what's next, she said to the silence, and walked toward her crew, toward the stars. Epilogue. Into the chorus. 3 months had passed since Echo Station's first broadcast, and the Stellarian hummed with life once more, its engines purring as it cut through the edges of the Lyrithar's mist. Lyra Cade stood at the helm, her hands steady on the controls, the familiar weight of command now a comfort rather than a burden. The ship's hull gleamed with fresh patches, a patchwork of survival and renewal, much like the crew who called it home. The cockpit buzzed with quiet activity. Torin Voss lounged in the co-pilot's seat, his datapad balanced on his knee as he hummed a new melody, a jaunty tune inspired by the mysterious signal they'd picked up weeks ago. Sari Lin sat cross-legged on the floor, her tools scattered around her as she tinkered with a small transmitter, her dark hair falling into her eyes. Kale Draven leaned against the doorway, a mug of synthetic coffee in hand, his graying hair catching the light from the viewport. Signals still faint, Torin said, tapping the pad. But it's holding steady, 10 light years out. Give or take. You sure you want to chase this, Captain? Lyra glanced at him, her green eyes bright with a spark she hadn't felt in years. You backing out on me, Voss? He grinned, shaking his head. Nah, just checking. Could be a wild goose chase, or another fight. Either way, we'll handle it, Sari said, her voice quiet but firm. She looked up, a small smile breaking through her usual reserve. We've got the station to fall back on now. Kale snorted, sipping his coffee, assuming it doesn't blow up first. Lyrithar tech's still a mystery to me. It's stable, Lyra said, a note of amusement in her tone. Zara's been tweaking it. They're stronger now, strong enough to send us off. The orb pulsed faintly from its perch near the console, its light a steady gold. We grow, Zara's voice whispered in their minds. You seek, we wait, return when ready. Lyra nodded, a silent gratitude passing between them. The Lyrithar had become more than allies, partners in a shared redemption. She thought of their search for the Xyleron's lost emotions, the fragments they'd salvaged from the wrecks. If they could heal that wound, maybe the swarm's echoes could join the chorus instead of haunting it. Course plotted, Torin announced, setting the pad aside. Ready when you are. Lyra took a breath, her gaze drifting to the viewport. The mist parted ahead, revealing a sea of stars, vast, uncharted, alive with possibility. She felt Aaron and Cal beside her, not as shadows now, but as lights guiding her forward. Engage, she said, her voice clear. The Stellarian surged, engines flaring as it left the mist behind. Torin's hum turned to song. Sari's laughter joined in, and Kale's gruff chuckle followed, a harmony of their own. Lyra smiled, her heart full. Whatever lay ahead, friend, foe, or silence, they'd face it together. The chorus sang on, and they were part of it now.